Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I am working on this mermaid painting, which was mostly brought on by the fact that it was Mermay when I was working on this one, and I actually ended up taking quite a while on this piece in a good way. I let myself set it aside and work on other stuff in between, so it's been a couple weeks since I really started her sketch, and that was really beneficial for working on her and getting her the way that I want. And that really is the workflow that I'd prefer to get into. I'd rather work on several different pieces at the same time, because then when I'm starting to get a little bored of one or I'm sick of working on the same thing, I can switch to something else. And I've found that actually makes a big difference as far as the quality of my pieces. I've been trying to pay attention to that, but I definitely notice that when I start painting or working on a piece, I have a lot more energy for it. And at some point I start getting a little bit more sloppy and lazy with certain things and the way that I'm executing it. Not always, but sometimes. And being able to switch from one piece to another really helps things to stay fresh, especially when it comes to switching from one phase in the process for another. So say I'm working on a painting and going back and working on another sketch for something else, it just completely resets. When I go back to that original piece and I'm working on it, I am actually able to concentrate and enjoy it and put in the effort that I was letting ebb away as I was working on it. And I also found that because I was letting myself take breaks, they were starting to correspond with times that I would sit and rework the same things over and over again. So when I'm working on pretty much any type of painting, no matter what medium I'm using, I tend to have certain phases where I get a little bit stuck with indecision. I want to make sure that it turns out as good as it can, and I get a little afraid to move on with, say, the colors that I'm working with or how I want to execute the line work and if there's going to be line work. So I find that those points, when I step away from it at that point and work on something else, when I come back to it, it's a lot easier to be decisive about it, because while I'm working on something else, like a sketch for something, my mind is still wandering, so I'm still thinking about that piece without staring at it and obsessing over it. And I find that it's a lot easier to make a natural decision on what I'm working on that. So when I come back to it, it's like, oh yeah, of course, that was a good idea. This is the way that I want to do it. I particularly thought it was very helpful with this piece, since when I'm working digitally, I always get to a point where I've already flatted the piece, so everything has a color assigned to it, and I just keep working the colors. I can't settle down on which one's working the best and which ones I think are worth pursuing and which ones I don't. I just can't get past that point very quickly. And sometimes I end up taking hours where I'm just sitting there tediously changing one layer color to another. And then sometimes I end up going all the way back to the beginning, and I completely discard any of those options that I had. And it can feel incredibly frustrating. And I'm in this little whirlpool and I just keep going down and down and I can't get out of it and I can't move forward with it. So working on this and being able to step away from it completely was really beneficial for my state of mind. What I ended up doing was I saved a couple JPEGs of a few of the color options that I had. I had a warmer one where she had almost like a burgundy tail, and a cooler one where she was all very green based, and I saved those two, and then I worked on another sketch. When I came back to it, I knew which one I wanted to move forward with, and I was able to move forward with that. Although the funny thing is that it ends up being neither of those, and it's kind of a combination of the two. I end up going with a color palette that's has some more greens in it, and instead of being warm reds, it's more purples, and that's where the warmth comes into it. I'm actually a little bit surprised at how well it worked for me, because I used to think that I was someone that worked better at just sitting down and completing a piece and getting it done and then moving on to the next one. But I've looked back, and the times that I feel the most creative and engaged with all of my pieces are times when I'm working on multiple ones at the same time. Like when I was in college and I had several classes where I had to get multiple assignments done and work with completely different concepts. Those were the times that I felt really excited about working on every single one of them. So I think that's definitely more where I fit. Looking back at that, I fit more into something where I have lots of projects going on and I can jump from one to the next. So we can go ahead and talk a little bit about this actual piece. There were a few things that I needed to really pay attention to and work on throughout the process of this one. So because she's a mermaid and she's submerged underwater, she needed to look like she belonged in it. So if I had done like one of my first earlier options where she was very warm toned completely, if I had left it like that, it would have looked really odd, like she was just pasted on top of a picture of the ocean. She wouldn't look like she had water in between her and the viewer, and that was really important for placing her in this environment. And that was kind of where I fussed with the colors a little bit more, because I wanted her to be a little bit cooler so that she looks like she's surrounded by water. But I also still needed her to have enough contrast that she wouldn't just immediately be lost in the background in the blue. So it was a fine balance of trying to find how can I make her cool but not so cool that she blends in with the background, and how can I make sure that she has contrast but it's not so much that she doesn't look like she has a place in it. And I think the end result I really like. I finally got there, but it was a process where I had to pay attention to it all along the way. And as I was adding new layers, say to deepen the water behind her and beneath her, or which ways that I was adjusting every single layer, I was trying to pay attention to that to eventually get to the goal that I did reach, which is exciting that I did end up getting there. And value was another thing that, again, I was balancing and trying to make sure that it worked. The value of her against the background was really where I was focusing on. But this one, I made sure that I had a layer at the very top, and I made it black, and I just set the color mode, or the layer mode, to color. And what that does is basically it takes away all the colors, so you can see the piece entirely grayscale, and that instantly makes it so that you can read the values and make sure that it's working. And I just kept that right up at the top, so every once in a while I'd go engage that layer and check what's going on and make sure that it was reading the way that I wanted it to. One of the challenges that I kind of gave myself with the values in this painting is that I ended up choosing a dark color for her tail and a light color for her hair, but the way that the light would be filtering through the water is there would be light at the top where the sun is, and it would be darker at the bottom, which means that there would not be any contrast between the tail and the background of the water behind it, and her hair and the background behind it. And of course I could have reversed it, but ultimately that was the look that I wanted for this mermaid. So that was a value thing that I kind of was struggling with, because I love being able to show contrasting values next to each other to make them pop. And it would have been great to have it flipped around and really make her just stand out. And I did try that a little bit, where I had light at the bottom and dark at the top, but I ultimately chose to go with something that was more naturally occurring and a little bit lighter and uplifting, I guess. But I did get to a point where the value that I had for the background ended up being lighter than I had planned. So actually, you'll see at the very end where the footage ends, I accidentally lost the last clip, so I can't show you the progression from that, but it's a lot darker than the final version that I end up going with. And that's because I ended up choosing a value for the ocean that I think helps the most amount of her stand out the best. But the highlights and the reflected lights on this painting was by far my favorite part, and I think it really did make the piece. It was really integral to have that bouncing off light to get this underwater look. And I will definitely say I don't think that I necessarily executed it the best way possible, or that I couldn't have improved on it, because I absolutely could have. But once I was working on it and I added those, it just really fleshed out this piece. It placed her where she needed to, and I love that transformation of having a detail that you can put into a piece and it instantly makes it better. One of the things that I think really helped ground it was putting the reflected light on the ground, the sand below her, and also having that reflected up on the underside of her where the shadow is, and having a bounced off rim lighting from below on her. All of those layers of highlights, it just all came together to give this a really luminous look, which I love being able to create. And when I was doing the sand on the bottom of the ocean, I was looking up a lot of references for that, and I love the look how each layer, as it gets farther and farther away, it just becomes closer to the color of the ocean around it. So it just kind of disintegrates as it goes back there, and it's really mysterious, and I loved that. So I actually just created several layers on top of each other so that each one recedes back into the background, and for each layer I just brought it a little bit closer to the ocean color rather than the foreground one, so it's just like a step from one to the next to the next. And I think I also went in with Gaussian blur And that just gives this really nice soft edge to each one. And I had it the highest on the farthest away sand and lowered it until I got to the front, which had no Gaussian blur. And that also really helped give it a little bit of a place. I was trying to pay attention to the photographs and how they were rendered, or not rendered, how they existed, how the sand looked on the bottom of the ocean. And it gets a little bit harder to see that hard edge of the sand. So that really helped finalize that. And that is it for today. I do have prints of her available in an extra large size and smaller. And I'll have a link down in the description that'll take you over there. And a big announcement, I will be at the Denver Comic-Con, which is on June 15th, 16th, and 17th. So if you're going to be in the area, I would love if you came by and said hello. I am 99% sure that my booth table is W4. So I will check that and update it if it's not that. But I will be back with another video on Wednesday. So I'll see you guys then. Thank you so much for watching.